Good afternoon and welcome. This is a special meeting of the Sunshine Ordinance Task Force called for Tuesday, June 1st, 2010 at 5 p.m. and beginning at 5:02 p.m. May we have the roll call, please?
Yes, Mr. Chair. Member Snyder excused. Member Nee.
Here.
Nee present. Member Cotton.
Here.
Cotton present. Member Manny.
Here.
Manny present. Member Washburn. Washburn absent. Member Knebber.
Here.
Knebber present. Member Goldman.
Aye.
Goldman present. Member Wolf. Wolf present. Member Chan.
Present.
Chan present. Member Johnson.
Here.
Johnson present. Member Williams. Member Williams absent. Mr. Chair, we have a quorum.
Thank you. We have only one item on the agenda, so I don't think there would be any changes there too. I will, although it's not on the agenda, at approximately 6 p.m. we will open it up to general public comment. I believe the last item that we discussed was 67.20, new 67.21. No, new 67.23, current 67.22. This is on release of oral public information. In 67.23, we got as far as revising language to subsection A, and we were going to vote on whether subsections A and B should be switched, and I think that's our first that's our first order of business today. So, does anyone have any comments on that or wish to make a motion to that effect?
I move that we switch
Second.
A and B.
Okay, there's a motion to switch A and B. Discussion? Okay, is there public comment on the motion to switch in the amendments package? It would be new 67.23 A and B. Any public discussion? Seeing none, public comment is closed.
Is there a 30-second gap there, Rick? I mean, I just walked in, whatever. I'm just confused about what you're trying to accomplish because
Microphone, please.
I'm confused about what you're trying to, because B refers to the role of the person or person so designated, which would refer back to the person in A, I assume.
Okay, I believe that first sentence, and someone will correct me if I'm wrong, that first sentence has been stricken from that section.
Yes, I believe we
Well,
voted on
let's
that.
take a look and see if it has. We're talking about A or B?
B.
B, well, it's, the
The
copy
first
I'm
sentence.
looking at, it's still there. Sorry.
Mr. Chair,
Member Knebber.
I believe that we were voting on this, but in the course of voting on this in the last meeting, we recessed because we had improper minutes. I think it didn't go through. I didn't think that we actually finished voting on it. I'm not 100% sure. At least last one I was at, that's what happened.
Okay, I'm sorry, I didn't hear what you said,
Okay.
and
I believe
apologize.
the last time we talked about this, we recessed because we had we decided that we closed the meeting because we decided we didn't have the proper minutes to look over, and the people hadn't been able to look over the changes. So I don't think that we actually voted on that yet.
Okay. My own notes here show moved second, carried 6-0 to strike the first sentence of that particular subsection.
I think you're right. I think that's what we got accomplished before recessed.
That's correct.
Page,
However,
this one.
Mr. Grossman is correct when he says that that deletion, agreed upon deletion, is not reflected in the latest version that we've been presented here. And it should be. So I think under the circumstances, we can still act on the matter. And what I would like to do is continue taking public comment on this.
Okay.
So, Mr. Grossman, please
Yeah.
proceed.
Okay, I actually, since I'm apparently one of the few people around who make a lot of public records requests, have run into a problem with the planning department on who that person is. Because it took me, I actually had to ask the director himself who he had designated, because I had submitted a number of public records requests, including questions regarding operations or policy, and I got the records. That's a different story, but I never got the questions answered. So I literally had to send an email to the director and ask him who he had designated. And so actually, one of the people that I sent the questions to was the person who has designated. So what my point is, I think they should designate somebody the way it was before and have that person identified in some way so that if you call the generic number, a person in reception or wherever it is will tell you who the knowledgeable person designated to provide public information is.
Thank you. Is there further public comment?
Yes. Peter Warfield, having walked in at 4 minutes after, you didn't have the usual delay. So do I understand you're discussing, I'm seeing on the projector 67.4 to 14.
No.
But I understand you're discussing something else.
We are discussing 67.23 A and B right now. There is a motion before us to switch those two sections, and we must also note that the first sentence in section B has been stricken. That was done in our last special meeting. What you see on the screen was put up there by Member Wolf, who has had to step out to take care of some outside business. He will be back in approximately 15 minutes to a half hour, at which time he will be able to keep what's on the screen up with what we're doing here at the dais.
Thank you. So section B has stricken what I see in the agenda packet, starting with the role of the person or persons so designated shall be to provide, and so on and
That's
so
right.
forth.
That sentence was stricken at a previous meeting. And so
All right.
what we are acting on is whether to reverse A and B with the first sentence that you see in B having been stricken.
Well, whether you reverse it or not, let me comment about what is important here and what I think is needed. I think it's extremely important to underscore and to keep the crucial part that has been stricken in A. Well, I guess it's now been reversed. But what we used to have clearly, and I don't know where it is anymore, is that every employee who has access to records is a custodian of the public record and has a responsibility to provide access as well as copies. and has a responsibility to provide copies and access to inspection and copies, basically on an expeditious basis. Is that still in? I don't see that where it used to be in 67.21. In other words, we're jiggering around the whole thing, and it seems to be we're making changes upon changes. The original ordinance has a section 67.21 that says everybody with access is a custodian of the public record, and then it talks about release of oral public records in a separate section. Let me in any case make a comment that there really needs to be a strengthening of the oral provision of information. And as the previous speaker, Mr. Grossman, said or implied, and it's certainly something that I think is very important, and I think I've said it before, the responsible parties need to be very clearly and very obviously posted in a way that the public knows who is that. So, for example, if it's the person who's giving responses to information in a general way for the department, such as is stated in A, that needs to be clearly posted and identified so that it's easy for a person to know, I don't know who to approach in Department X about a specific piece of information, or who is responsible rather, but I do know that so-and-so is the person to ask when I don't know specifically who's in charge. And also, I believe there used to be a requirement for a backup, and that backup person should also be posted so that the public can clearly understand who it is. I also think there needs to be a great deal of need to strengthen and clarify the requirement to provide oral information. Section B talks about not curtailing existing contacts, but it doesn't explicitly state that there is an affirmative duty by public employees to give information. So if I ask the question that I asked today and it's not documented, and let's say I asked that of an administrator in an office, it seems to me there ought to be a clear duty, to the degree the administrator is knowledgeable, to give the kind of answer that I appreciate you giving me, because you knew it and the administrator presumably was in the room at the time it happened and would also know it. There's a certain amount of information that isn't written down. And that information, as well as information that can be understood from documents, needs to be imparted to people without what we often find, and that is, if it ain't a document, I don't have to tell you nothing nohow. So I would like to see it very much affirmatively stated and strengthened about the duty of public employees to respond to inquiries from the public, and that there should be very clearly identified whoever it is that is the generally knowledgeable person in a department, as well as there used to be a backup, and I don't know that that still exists. I certainly think there should be at least one backup. There should be basically somebody there and clearly identified. Thanks.
Thank you. Is there further public comment? For the benefit of those who just came in, we are discussing in the amendments package new section 67.23, current section 67.22, and the motion before us is whether to switch subsections A and B. Is there further public comment? Seeing none, public comment is closed. Task force? I do have one question for Mr. Grossman or Mr. Warfield, whichever of you would like to comment on this. A couple things. First of all, Mr. Warfield, perhaps you weren't here when we did it, but in section 67, new section 67.23A, we did reword it quite substantially, and it now contains one sentence, which reads, every department and policy body shall at all times during its hours of operation have at least one person knowledgeable about the affairs of the entity available available to provide public information. Sorry, I'm looking at my own scribbling here, but that's what it now states. And then the second sentence in that, or the ensuing sentences in that, were stricken. So I think that makes it clear what the policy is. Now, one of the reasons that we did that, and I'm a little bit puzzled here, because it sounds to me like what the two of you are advocating is something that you have been arguing against before, which is the appointment or identification of what could be termed a custodian of public records. How do you reconcile what you just said with your opposition to a custodian of public records? Please clarify that.
Well, I'd certainly be glad for you to ask Mr. Grossman as well, but I think it needs to be very clear, and in the previous version there was something that clarified who this person is. There is to be somebody in the original who is knowledgeable, as it says, about the department's or policy body's operations, plans, policies, and positions. And it goes on to say that, at least by my recollection, the idea about the person who's giving this information was that it would be somebody that anybody could go to, whether or not they understood any level of detail about a department operations. So if I want to go to the library and just ask, what was your book budget last year, but I don't know who spends the book budget or who made up the book budget or who knew what was actually finally spent maybe in the finance office, I could go to that person and say, okay, what was the library's book budget? Or maybe ask who would be able to answer that. I don't oppose having somebody who's knowledgeable about the affairs of the body as an identified person who is specifically, as it originally stated, there as a resource if the requester doesn't know the details of the operation of the body. What I very much oppose, and I think others as well, is to assign a single source of information for an entire department when in fact you may want to talk to experts, knowledgeable people who run things, who make decisions in various departments, which you learn about from the knowledgeable person or which you already know. As an example, at the library, they've tried to make the Library Commission Secretary the so-called custodian of records, and when I and others have approached specific people, like the head of tech services, to ask how do you handle the ordering of out-of-print materials, we then get an answer back from the Secretary of the Library Commission saying, I have been forwarded your email from this person that you wanted to talk to, and I'm now going to handle the response. That is completely inappropriate because the Secretary to the Library Commission isn't a librarian, doesn't have library experience other than as a secretary to my knowledge, and doesn't know the details, and essentially is placed as a blockade to the individual's ability to talk with and contact, correspond with, query a person that individual may understand is the person in charge or the most knowledgeable. So it needs to be clear that we've got two sets of people. There's everybody in the organization who is responsible for telling what they know and showing what they know. And then there's this person over here who, if you don't know who to go to in the organization, in a general way can help you.
Thank you. Mr. Grossman?
I think the point I tried to make earlier about the difference between locating a public record and getting it a copy or just looking at a file is a lot easier because generally you have a sense of the organization. So in the planning department, you can submit the request to the persons who you would expect to be involved in the process of reviewing a particular site location and identifying the records that are available. However, that person does not have the overview that the person who is actually designated as the knowledgeable person about policies and operations, Mr. Brian Smith, has at planning. And he's the one who can tell you if they have a database for certain things. He can tell you what the protocol or policy they've established for identifying when a street tree is required under Section 143 of the Planning Code. He can tell you how they coordinate with DPW and DBI on matters involving Section 143. But the person who's got the document, the record that you're interested in, probably doesn't know all of that. So I think there's a global view that is expected from the person who is designated, and the person who has the record, if he has it, is a custodian, period. So you shouldn't have to chase down the person who's knowledgeable, because that's easy. It's usually somebody in upper management who has a very good sense of how the department or the agency works. So I don't think there's a disconnect between the two concepts of a custodian of public records and designating a knowledgeable person who knows the policies and procedures and such of the department or agency.
Thank you. Any further discussion by the task force? Seeing none, Member Washburn.
Maybe this was discussed earlier, but the motion before us, as I understand it, is that the new 67.23 B and A would be switched in order.
That's correct, and for your information, the first sentence in section B was stricken at an earlier meeting by vote of the task force. Was
Right,
stricken.
that's what I thought. Sorry.
Okay.
So the first sentence will be each public employee has the duty to respond.
That's correct.
I'm wondering, in listening to the conversation from the members of the public, rather than knowledge about the affairs of the entity, it seems like policies and procedures would be a better way to phrase that. That implies that this person has an overview and a really clear understanding
Okay,
of how
that's
the
a good
permit-
point. It's a good point, but not part of the motion we're dealing with. We can go back.
Okay, all right.
But at this point, we're just voting on whether to switch these two
Okay.
sections.
All right.
Further discussion? Roll call, please.
On the motion, Member Cotton.
Aye.
Cotton, aye. Member Manny.
Aye.
Manny, aye. Member Washburn.
Aye.
Washburn, aye. Member Knebber.
Aye.
Knebber, aye. Member Goldman.
Aye.
Goldman, aye. Member Wolf. Member Wolf, excuse. Member Chan.
Aye.
Chan, aye. Member Johnson.
Aye.
Johnson, aye. Member Nee.
Aye.
Nee, aye. Mr. Chair, we have 8 ayes.
Okay, that takes us to section C, and there was some typographical information that needed to be cleaned up. Other than that, is there anybody who has any further changes to section C?
Chair Nate.
Member Cawthon?
Did we get the typo in B, in line 9?
Inquiries?
Inquiries?
Yes.
We got it, okay.
Okay. Is there, let's just ask, is there any other, we have looked at, I believe we've looked at the rest of that C, D, E is proposed for, well, E is, has been moved to another part. Yeah, E is moved to D. So I guess D and E are switched, basically. But in the substance, any, in C, D, and E, any proposed changes in the substance?
I have none.
Okay, I had one proposed change in E. Let's see, this would be new E. On line 12, I would strike the words enjoyed by public employees and put of public employees. First Amendment rights. This is on page 64, packet page 67, line 12. It says First Amendment rights enjoyed by public employees, and I would change that to say First Amendment rights of public employees. Okay, before we vote on sections C through E, is there any public comment on any of those sections?
I don't understand C. It says if it would take the employee more than 15 minutes to obtain the oral information responsible to an inquiry, the employee shall notify the requester of the procedures for obtaining records, okay, under other sections of the ordinance and provide a form if available. So, Director of Planning has nominated Mr. Smith, designated him. I walk in, I ask to see Mr. Smith. I say to him, will you please tell me, if you can, about the procedures or policies that for identifying Section 143 street tree requirements when you have an application submitted? And he'll scratch his head. It's going to take me more than 15 minutes. How do you know that? Listen, I know this. I know planning. I know all about planning. It's going to take me a lot longer. But this is what you can do. You can try to get a record, okay? And this is the procedure, because so-and-so has been designated a custodian of record, and here's the form. You fill it out, and if you're lucky, you'll get it in 7 to 10 days. The record may or may not have the information you want, but, you know, I'm not here to spend all my time giving public information orally. I've got a job to do. So C is an invitation to the employee to do exactly what Mr. Smith has been doing to me for the last 3 or 4 weeks. When I send him questions, he doesn't even bother to answer them. Now, whether that's appropriate or not, that's for a different occasion. But I'm just pointing out that this makes no sense to me. If the person designated can demonstrate that it will take more than 15 minutes because he has to check with somebody and that person's out or whatever, that's different. But this is an open invitation to just get the runaround if you're looking for information. Thank you.
Thank you. Further public comment?
Peter Warfield. Mr. Grossman, of course, is right as usual. But there's a bigger problem here altogether, and that is the tortured language and the backing into it through negatives and double negatives. I think it should say very forthrightly, every employee shall be required to respond to an inquiry or inquiries from an individual, and then you can qualify it if it would take less than 15 minutes to provide the reply or obtain the information responsive to the inquiry. And if not, and so on and so forth. This backing in, if it would take less, I mean, it's absolutely an invitation to wink, wink, nod, nod, oh, this is going to take more than 15 minutes. I think it needs to be at the very least stated in the affirmative. The previous, what used to be in B, adds to that sense of not being required. In another part, or in other parts of the Sunshine Ordinance, it's very clear that the response, the requirement, there is a requirement to respond to public requests for information. It is stated in another part of Sunshine as a requirement of every person, every public employee's employment. And that's intended to say this is part of your job. It's not extra. It's not something to be squeezed in if you have the chance and it's convenient compared with your other duties. And I think that likewise, the very same thing needs to be stated very clearly in Section C, and for that matter in what was B and now is A. It is way too easy to say, I'm busy, I got other things to do than to answer the public. You're giving the whole concept of Sunshine short shrift and second billing when you have this tortured way of talking about if it doesn't bother the employees' other duties, if it's not, as in B stated, it's not disruptive of their operational duties. And that is poison to the concept of open government and to at least the equality of duties that an employee has with respect to their operational duties. Their operational duties include responding to public records requests. I think D is good because it is a kind of protection for public employees who might speak, shall we say, out of turn or without authorization. I don't know how much that's worth to employees, but I think that's a very valuable and important provision. The issue that Mr. Grossman raises is indeed a problem, and that is what's going to take more than 15 minutes. I would also like the employee to be helpful and say, listen, what you're asking me might take more than 15 minutes, but may I help you? In other words, there's another provision where the employee who is giving information is supposed to provide you with assistance in locating the documents, et cetera, et cetera. Likewise, here with oral information, I think the employee might reasonably say, look, if I give you all the 15 versions of the budget and the 900-page version and the 300-page version and the one-page version, it'll take me days. But I could give you the one-page and the 6-page version, and I could give you the name of the document you could get if you want to study the 300-page version. There ought to be some requirement, as there is in another section, sorry, I don't know to quote chapter and verse, that talks about assisting the requester. And so at the very least, Section C should talk about not ways that the employee can say, no, this is going to take way too long, hasta la vista, baby, take this form and fill it out. It should require, first of all, affirmatively that the employees have a responsibility to respond to inquiries. And second of all, if they don't think it's going to be in a, quote, reasonable amount of time answerable, then there ought to be a requirement, as in another section, to assist the requester and say, here's what we could do in whatever the allotted time.
Thank you. For the public comment.
Good evening, Chair Nee and Commissioners. Anonymous Tennis here. I have a problem with the appropriate form. Is that for the requester to fill out, I guess? And what have you make a request by telephone or computer and all? Do you still have to fill out a form? It seems like it's contradiction to one of the excuse me, one of the other laws in here that you can make a request in any form that you wanted to. Now we have to fill out a form if they have a special form for us to fill out. It would create a problem if it was done by phone or by computer. That's all I wanted to say. Thank you.
Thank you. I believe that closes public comment. Is there discussion among the task force? Member
Just have a
Coffin.
technical change. line 16 on page 63 refers to if the employee has to spend more than 15 minutes, she shall tell the requester how to obtain records under, I guess you mean 67.20 and 67.21, because these citations, 67.21 and 67.20, that's to the old ordinance. So should the 67.23 is the section that we're working on. So shouldn't we update the code sections in line 16? In other words, the employee should inform the requester of the old 67.21, which is now 67.20. That's the one, how do you get information? And I believe that 67.23 would be 67.21, which is immediacy of response. As we're talking about 67.23, we're working on 67.23, so that's obviously not what was intended. So I'm just saying, let's update the code sections to reflect the new ordinance.
Okay, so instead of 67:21 and 67:23, we should be saying 67:20 and 21, is that right?
Right. If you mean procedure for obtaining public records and immediacy of response, because those are the new numbers for those sections.
Okay. Thank you. Member Washburn.
Well, I'm tending to agree with members of the public that C is, it's confusing, for one thing. And it may be, if we want to mandate, or we want to make sure that employees respond in a reasonable amount of time, there's probably a better way to say it, as Mr. Warfield said. But I think we should delete the material that was added that's underlined, because if we're dealing with oral information, it's not going to exist in written form. So filling out forms to request a record that doesn't exist is not going to be very helpful.
So what's the wording you would propose?
Something to the effect of the employee will attempt to respond within 15 minutes with the requested information. If this isn't possible, then I don't know what would be reasonable, but he or she will respond within 24 hours. I don't know.
Well, we're talking about oral
Right.
information requests, so presumably the employee is dealing, face-to-face or on the phone with
Right.
somebody.
But may not know himself or herself the information. Would have to ask somebody who may not be around at that point in time. So, and the information doesn't exist in written form. So, I would imagine that employee would, talk to whoever does know as soon as possible and get back to the requester.
Okay. Member Cawthon?
I would just think that it would be appropriate to not only do what Member Washburn is proposing, but also to let the oral requester know that there is a way to get the information if they want to do it in writing. I mean, the whole basis of the Sunshine Ordinance is 67.20, and to a large extent 67.21. So it seems to me that a person who comes in and asks for oral information should be advised of all their options.
Okay?
But to add to that, I think it's important that I know you raised the issue, Member Washburn, of 15 minutes. Maybe someone might not have that answer in that time. Then if the person doesn't have the answer in that time, then it would be important to convey that to the requester. So that maybe within that 15 minutes, the person being asked can say, I need 24 hours. I don't have that. So somewhere in there that should be conveyed, that if they don't have the information, to say that they don't. I think that would be reasonable.
Okay, what we might do then is move forward with the other sections, come back at our next meeting, whenever that is, and with new language proposed for Section C. In Section D, this is line, page 63, line 20. There is another word that should be substituted there, where it says member of the public. Instead of any member of the public, it should say other member of the public. We've already agreed on this in the past. Now, getting back to Section C. Does anyone want to take a stab now at revising this now, or do we want to put it, continue the Section C to our next meeting? Okay, without objection, we will continue new 67.23C until our next meeting, and we will vote then on the other sections, D and E.
I move that we approve the sections D and E.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Discussion, public comment on D and E. Seeing none. Roll call, please.
On the motion, Member Cawthon?
Aye.
Cawthon, aye. Member Manny?
Aye.
Manny, aye. Member Washburn?
Aye.
Washburn, aye. Member Knebber?
Aye.
Knebber, aye. Member Goldman?
Aye.
Goldman, aye. Member Chan?
Aye.
Chan, aye. Member Johnson?
Aye.
Johnson, aye. Member Nee?
Aye.
Nee, aye. Mr. Chair, we have 8 ayes.
Okay. One other thing. Again, there was some question about the language in, excuse me, Section B. What would be new Section A. So that too will be continued for additional discussion.
Before we go to the next one, Chairman.
Member Cawthon,
Could I,
could you speak in the microphone, please?
what now is the deadline for us to submit this to the supervisors?
Probably 2 weeks ago.
So,
If we want, we're not going to make the November ballot with this.
so at one time, we talked about cutting down what we have yet to go through and only focusing on the really important things.
That's correct. Nobody seems, nobody has come forth, including yours truly, nobody has come forth with any such proposal. Nobody has come forth with their 5 or 6 items that they think really need addressing right now so that we can get a package to 4 supervisors, give them time to look at it, and in order that they can get this to the Department of Elections by June 15th, which I believe is their deadline. It's
gotta
not
be
going to
at the-
happen.
Well, yeah, the email I sent you talked about making sure that we provide for adequate legal and administrative representation. That was one thing. Also, some of the things that are in section, currently in Article 4, I think are very important. I would be willing to go to those things and try and get them done as fast as possible, or to go with what we've got. And we've been working on this for the last 2 years, every month, with public comment every month. And we worked on it the prior 2 years, every month, with public comment every month. So it just seems to me that there becomes a time when you have to fish or cut bait.
Okay, what we have so far comprises about 40 changes. Now, this is a 115-page document. And putting this into digestible form where we have only single underlines and crossouts without the double underlines and crossouts, where you have a so-called clean copy as it would look if it went to the voters. That's the first thing we would have to do now. If we're gonna give this to 4 supervisors, we have to give that to them now. We would also have to have a very clear summary of the major changes that we're proposing. And again, there were about 40 of them, and they have to be edited as well. So we're talking about even, you know, we would have to do a rush job of it, and I'm not willing to do that.
Well, you know, the thing of it is that the ordinance we've got now is workable. We know the flaws in it, but it's workable. I just hate to see 4 years of work be deferred for yet another 2 years or whenever the next election is, and I just want to caution my colleagues that it's important not to let the perfect be the enemy of the good. And I think we've got a very serviceable document with what we've done so far. I think we may never finish this document if we proceed the way we are going. So that would be my thought.
Well, we don't have to wait 2 years. We could put it on the ballot next year. That's the first thing. Second thing is, I don't think there's enough time to get what we have here to the supervisors, give them enough time to digest what we have, and sign off on it. You know, they have to get it to they would have 2 weeks from today to get it to the Department of Elections. I don't think they'd have enough time. It's regrettable. You know, we've had not just this task force, but members of the public who have worked very, very hard on this. And I am, without speaking for them, I would be willing to bet that they are as frustrated as we are, and maybe more so. We've had Mr. Grossman, Mr. Warfield, the gentleman who identifies himself as anonymous tenants, Kimo Crossman, Ray Hartz, you know, and other people over the years who have given us some very, very good suggestions, and maybe some that we have thought that were not so good, but at least they made their contributions, and they've worked very, very hard on this. And, you know, it's very unfortunate that we are not going to make this November's ballot. But I think for us to, at this point, try to rush this through in order to make this November's ballot, I think would be a huge mistake, and I don't think it's doable.
I don't know if it's doable either, Chair Nee, but I have a little history because I was around when we were crafting Prop G. And we used to do it at our regular meetings. David Pilpel was the chair at that time. And somehow or other, we crunched it through and we got it on the ballot.
Correction, Member Cawthon.
It's imperfect, but it certainly is workable.
Member Cawthon, correction. Prop G was done by San Franciscans, by a citizens organization who, you know, Prop G, the draft work was done by a couple of attorneys named Stephen LeBlanc and Thomas Burke. And they sat down for several hours over a period of several weeks and went through it and got the language. Then we took it to try to get 4 supervisors We couldn't even get 2. The only one who had listened to us was Tom Amiano. And so we decided to take it to the streets. We collected signatures. Doug Comstock, among others, collected 1,000. We collected signatures to get that on the ballot.
Okay, I just wanted to give you a little history of my participation in this way back in 1999, and as I say, we did discuss it. I don't think anybody on this body now was on the task force then except me, so we did discuss it, and we did have to go to the streets, and the only supervisor who was for it was Amiano, although I will say that He
wound up
and
endorsing it.
Leno did not, or there were a couple that didn't vote no, but even Sue Bierman voted no on it.
There were 7 supervisors who publicly opposed it. Amiano and Ye publicly supported it. Supervisors Leno and Newsom were silent.
Correct.
Furthermore, Mr. Pilpel wound up in his own way opposing Prop G because he felt the language would be too onerous on city departments.
I guess my point is that I think it's really important that we develop a timeline and work in such a way that we meet it. If the timeline is 2010, fine, but I think it would be
2010's
great if
gone.
we could, 2011, I think it'd be great if we could work out, what they used to call it when I worked at the bank, a project plan, and we had to say, okay, we need to do this much by this and this much by that so that we can finish by our date. We do need to have a target date, and we we'd have to set some goals for us if we want to meet. We've twice not missed the deadline. So
Well, there's a reason for
I would
that.
think that if we have spent this much time on it and the public has spent this much time on it, I'm only suggesting that we might want to set a target that we can reasonably reach.
Member Cawthon, we had a timeline. We said had a lot of discussion at regular and special meetings, and unfortunately, a number of the special meetings either did not take place or ended early because of lack of quorum. We're a volunteer body, and that's going to happen. People here have outside commitments with family, job, et cetera. Member Washburn?
Oh, yeah, I was going to remind you of that fact, too, that we failed to meet quorum. But also, Member Nee and I have had this ongoing debate about the best time to bring this to the voters, and I've always thought that next year would be better. 2011, won't be anything happening statewide or nationally. Well, statewide, there'll be probably some ballot measures, but voters will be focused on this city with the mayoral election. I think it would probably be a better time. And I think that, yeah, we don't have to have the perfect, be an enemy of, a serviceable document, but I think now we can give this our best shot, make it as good as we possibly can, and make sure we understand it thoroughly, that the summaries are excellent, and we certainly have time to do that. But I think we need to push as hard as we are now. And so I think 2011 is absolutely doable.
Member Goldman?
So with that, why don't we dive into the next section?
Member Washburn?
I wanted to, I had a suggestion for what's now B that I think, I'm ready with the language, and I think that we could probably dispense with this now.
We're still in 67.23?
Right, so
Okay.
A, it's the,
What-
no, it's the new B.
section A. No, it's the new
The new
A.
section A, which we're switching with B, right?
That's correct.
We just voted to do that. So, new section B, what was A until a little while ago. Every department and policy body shall at all times during its hours of operation have at least one person knowledgeable about the policies and procedures of the entity available to provide public information, and the comma should be struck. It's not needed. So I move that.
Is there a second?
Second.
Moved and seconded. Discussion, Member Johnson.
Does that, I'm not, since I wasn't present for discussions earlier, policies and procedure sounds like it doesn't cover specific details of the actual affairs or contracts or whatever that they're working on. If you ask for information about some subject matter that they're doing, it seems like policies and procedures leaves that out. Does that make sense? If we need to add maybe one more word in there that's associated with affairs, I'm not sure what that would be.
Operations.
Well, all those things to me sound like how the department is run and doesn't cover maybe a specific issue or subject matter that they're working on. Like if you ask planning about some specific building plans, policy and procedure and operation doesn't cover that. But affairs does because it's associated with what they're doing. I'm not sure what the word would be.
I guess when I say policies and procedures, and I think operations would be good to add, this would be somebody who understands how everything works in the department. And they may not know what a specific project is all about, but they would know who would be in charge. So somebody that would have the big picture. So that person may not, even know all the nitty-gritty about a particular piece of work that's happening, but would know where to point the person. You need to talk to this person. This person will have the information you need. I guess that's what I'm trying to. Like assignments. Yeah, would know, have that overview. So I would suggest policies, procedures, and operations.
Second accepts.
Further discussion? Okay. Is there public comment on this motion?
Peter Warfield, Library Users Association, thank you for the change. I was going to suggest operations or activities because I think the history is also important, although that's implied by knowledgeable. So I'm glad you've made the change to add operations. Perhaps activities is more general, in which case everything you said about somebody who knows how the thing works, and I would certainly add some of the history of it. Maybe activities works better than operations, but either way it adds to policy and procedures.
Thank you. Further public comment?
And I think that's definitely an improvement. The problem is who is that person on any given day? I often wonder, and you'll have to excuse me, how many of the members of the task force have actually gone through and made records requests of various departments and agencies to get a sense of the types of battles that you have to deal with in order to get either a record or information. I've done a lot of it. I'm retired, and I apparently have a lot of time on my hands, and I still have my marbles, most of them anyway. But I have to say that my experiences across the board, with very few exceptions, are that if you want something that's really not what they like to give, then you gotta go to the mat with them one way or another. And having a knowledgeable person, I think, is important because you can at least test the water with that person and find out what the drift is going to be and decide what more you won't need to do. But unless you know who that is, as I didn't in the example I gave you earlier, you lose a lot of momentum. It took me 2 weeks, actually, almost 3 weeks, of various types of requests interspersed with questions to find out it was Mr. Smith. But I have to say this, and I said it very early, years ago, before I knew a lot less than I know now. if the departments and agencies responded in good faith, most of what you're talking about, you wouldn't even be talking about. The problem is there is a definite lack of good faith on the part of many of the departments. And when I say good faith, whether it's a bureaucratic reluctance or it's some other reason that they don't want you to know what they're doing, that's where the problems come in. And that's why this stuff has to get tightened up. And you cannot give them any wiggle room. And this is wiggle room. And you cannot give them any wiggle room. If you want a record, they'll say, well, we can't PDF it, we can't send you an email. That's what I had to do. I had to go downtown or down to planning after fighting with them to get a series of records converted into PDF format and emailed to me, which every other department just about does, but they wouldn't do it. And I went downtown today, and I went and I made those copies on the very same machine that they would use to scan it into a PDF file and email it to me. So what you have is this institutional problem that unless you really focus and drill down, and if you give them an opportunity to give you a little, move here and move there, it's just going to make your job harder if you're in the public. Thank you.
Thank you for the public comment.
I just want to say I support Mr. Grossman and Mr. Warfield's last remarks. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Public comment is closed. The chair would like to suggest a friendly amendment, and that is on line, well, the first line of section A. It's page 62, line 15. After the word department, put comma agency. So it would read every department, comma, agency, and policy body.
Sorry, what section?
We're still at 67.23, and this is on page 62 of your packet.
And
Member Washburn?
I also, I've given it some thought, and I like Mr. Warfield's suggestion about rather than operations, activities, because that would apply to a policy body also, whereas operations, not so clearly. So I think activities rather than procedures.
Okay, does this,
Rather than operations.
Okay.
Policies, procedures, and activities.
does the second accept?
Second accepts.
Maker? Who made the motion?
Me.
Oh, Maker, okay. Okay. Mr. Rustam, are you keeping up with us? Okay, thank you. Further discussion? Roll call, please.
On the motion, Member Cotton.
Aye.
Cotton, aye. Member Manny.
Aye.
Manny, aye. Member Washburn.
Aye.
Washburn, aye. Member Knebber.
Aye.
Knebber, aye. Member Goldman.
Aye.
Goldman, aye. Member Wolf. Wolf, aye. Member Chan.
Aye.
Chan, aye. Member Johnson. Johnson, aye. Member Nee.
Aye.
Nee, aye. Mr. Chair, we have 9 ayes.
Okay. For Mr. Wolf's benefit, we will be revisiting section 67 new section 67.23C at the next meeting. And I believe that takes us to
Excuse me, Mr. Chair.
Member Wolf.
Is that the
Microphone, please.
Is that the next meeting, amendments meeting, or the next regular meeting?
Well, that remains to be determined when we will next discuss the amendments package.
Okay, thank you.
We may decide to have it discussion at the next regular meeting. We may decide to have another special meeting. At this point, I don't know if you were here during the discussion we had a few minutes ago, but we've pretty much determined that we are not going to make this November's ballot with this. So at this point, we're not going to continue trying to rush it through. Section 67.24 public review member, oh, yes, as I had previously announced, although it's not on the agenda, we will take general public comment at this time. Speakers have 3 minutes each. Any general public comment?
Thank you, Peter Warfield, Library Users Association. I think what's coming out through comments certainly that I've made, but that others as well are making, is I think there's a real need to approach this not throwing out the discussions and the changes that you're working on, but to take a step back and look at what are the objectives that we're trying to accomplish. To talk about a tortured document that has had so many changes that it's hard to remember whether we're talking about changes to the original or changes to changes or changes to changes to changes is very difficult, especially if you don't have objectives in mind. When you hear Mr. Grossman or me or others talk about the experiences we've had and the difficulties we've had, when you hear people talk about what works and what doesn't work, that to me is the first step in a rational discussion about what you might want to do with the ordinance. Out of the objectives that you may have would reasonably come the steps needed to carry those out. One of the amusing moments was when I got forwarded by somebody knowledgeable an email that that person sent to somebody who had asked about the cost of copies. And this knowledgeable person, knowledgeable about Sunshine, wrote back to that person sending me a copy saying, "Ask Warfield. He's an expert on the cost of copies." It may seem like a simple thing, but it's preposterous that there needs to be somebody who's an expert on the cost of copies. Yes, I've brought complaints against the clerk of the Board of Supervisors over the cost of your agenda packets, which at one moment when it was 650 pages, the clerk tried to charge me $65 against my objections instead of $6.50. But if you know that the cost of copies is a problem or is an opportunity for gamesmanship, then you can look at all 4 places where copies are described as to cost and say, okay, we want to rationalize and make sane the cost of copies. Where in the ordinance are copies referenced? And rather than sitting here moment by moment looking at this sliver or that sliver, you'd at least have a larger game plan in which you would say, we're going to straighten out the cost of copies, and here's where the 4 places are that it occurs. So I think that's taking a step back would be very valuable as to what objectives you're trying to accomplish, and then the plan would be how do we accomplish that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Further general public comment.
Well, I'm certainly in agreement that I think fortuitously the draft won't be ready in time for this November. I think another year will make a big difference. As an example, maybe with some good sense and good fortune, ethics will realize what its role it really is in enforcing your actions, and you won't have to go to the extent you have in trying to fix the problem in the amendment. And I think it would be better if it were done by ethics than necessarily here. The other thing that I don't know how you're going to fix is the problem of staffing and legal support, both of which make it clear to me, at least, that you've been working at a serious disadvantage, just trying to get this on the screen. But for me, it gets to the point of being silly. As somebody said, I'm whining all the time. I sent Mr. Rustrom an email. I said, bring the Word version that shows the track changes, you know, with the little balloons and the different colors, and we'll get to see that. But what do we get? You get the same thing that you've had for the last 2 or 3 meetings, except one change. It says at the top, note, track changes made in use as of May 11. But you can't tell what they are because the track changes function isn't displayed. It's a problem of dealing with inadequate resources, and I think that is compounded by the fact that the city attorney is simply not prepared to do what it's supposed to do, to give you support. Okay, having said that, and you've heard it from me before, I put it in the memo I sent in March, and I even added provisions to deal with it. In 2005, a survey was made of all the departments and agencies regarding suggestions about the ordinance. I'm sure you'll recall that, Rick. That was 5 years ago. My guess is that times have changed, and it might be suitable to think about doing that again, except I think it should be also sent along to any member of the public who has suggestions. And the last thing is that, you know, I said, I wonder how many of you have actually had these real-world experiences. Well, I really think it's important. Maybe each one of you should pick a couple of departments or agencies and think about the kind of records or whatever you want and send in a request. Send in an immediate disclosure request. And don't use your name because they're going to know who you are. So use someone else's name and see what happens. See what happens.
Thank you. Further public, general public comment.
Chair Neek, Commissioners, Anonymous Tenants here. Last hearing, Ms. Sang had a case before you, and it was against the planner in the planning department. And the planner brought in this huge box full of documents, and the documents she wanted were not there. And you voted against them, found them a violation. And right after the hearing, Ms. Sang followed the planner out the door and asked, are you going to give me the documents? And he admitted that he had them. He admitted that he didn't give them to Ms. Sang. And he said emphatically no. I mean, this is ridiculous. I mean, all the changes you make in this document, you can change one word or every single word in the whole document. If you don't hold the employees accountable for what their actions, it doesn't make any difference. You know, you can change 5 million words, it doesn't make any difference. If they come here and they get paid overtime to deny us documents, they don't lose anything. But if they are responsible, if they intentionally do something wrong, and they have to put money out of their pocket, they're going to change the whole system by saying, hey, here's your documents, you can have them. That's all I want to say. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there further general public comment? We are taking public comment right now on non-agenda items.
Okay, good afternoon. I just want to say my experience with this board, I think that both of them are fair, but I have one question. Like my last experiences, it's not the department don't admit, in fact, they admit before you. They did not produce the document. And they also said they don't have, they bring a box, and as the chair asked him, is in the box? He said no. So I don't think that the law is clear. They should be cited and said they are violating the law. And then if the member think they have experiences that we have to be patient and they try, that's not the law saying that they should try, and then the board member decided, did they try hard enough? Before you, it should be, did they produce the document requested? In fact, I asked for March 11. I waited for more than 1 month before I filed the complaint. The message is sent to the department. If we have the board member support us, we don't have to produce document to you. We are lucky we have 7 to 2. What happened is 6 and then 4-2. So the department's message to them is, hey, we're lucky we don't have to produce. In fact, outside the hall, I asked them, would you please produce a document? His answer, no. We have a witness to hear that. So I just wondered, the board member, it's difficult, but I think that should make the decision according to the law, not your feelings, experiences with particular department. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you. There is nobody else in the audience gallery, so general public comment is closed. Member Chan.
In the last meeting, right, we did find violation on her case, correct?
I don't have my notes in front of me on that,
Yes, we
and
did, right?
I believe we did find violation. However, you know, this is a special meeting called for a specific purpose, and we cannot take any action here relevant to that case today.
I'm just asking a question.
Yeah, okay. Well, I believe we did find violation. Mr. Rustum, do you have notes on?
I do not have it with me, Mr. Chair, but what DCA 3 said is correct. We did find violation.
Find violation.
Yes.
Okay. Okay, we now resume discussion of the amendments package, and we are now at new section 67.24, public review file, policy body communications. There have been some changes suggested here in all three sections, well, in two of the three sections. Is there any additional change desired by any of the members? Okay, the chair has one suggestion in section A, and this would be on page 67, line 9. Actually, 67, where am I? Page 65, lines 8 and 9 in section A. I would insert the word calendar in both places where it says 30 days, so it would be 30 calendar days. In both cases on lines 8 and 9. Okay. Any other change suggestions here? Okay. Is there public comment on section 67.24?
Yes, Peter Warfield, Library Users Association. The wording of this has always struck me as problematic for the following reason. It is full of rather tortuous suppositions and an invitation to not include important correspondence that comes to a policy body. When it speaks about in 7, 8, and 9, which the clerk has distributed to or received from a quorum of the policy body concerning a matter calendared by the body within the previous 30 days or likely to be calendared within the next 30 days, this starts to get very hypothetical. What is likely to be calendared in the next 30 days? Is the clerk of the body a mind reader? Is my issue that I'm concerned about likely to be calendared? I think this would be simplified if it would just simply require that the bodies, as with the supervisors, correspondence file what it has received, which was, and not even distributed by the clerk, because what happens if the clerk sits on it? What if the clerk decides, I'm not distributing this until one day before the meeting? It's not going to be in a timely way. It's not going to be in a timely way in that what at the library is called the 3 and 30-day file. So a great deal depends on whether or not the clerk decides to distribute something and whether the clerk supposes that it's going to be, that it's likely to be calendared and so on and so forth. All of these things are very, very complex sort of hypotheticals, and the simplest thing would be simply to include whatever the public has sent to the body and make it available to anybody who wants to look at it. The other thing is there may be very significant issues going on which the members of the public might wish to have calendared, but which the body is ignoring. Just as an example, the library has multiple branches closed and only very, very minimal bookmobile service. Hundreds of people have signed petitions. People have been sending letters. None of it needs to be evident to anybody coming to this file, because that has been studiously avoided as a subject by the Library Commission. And since it hasn't been put on their calendar for discussion or action, even if people were sending thousands of letters, hundreds of letters, scores of letters, even 1 or 2 or 3 letters, wouldn't be in this file or evident unless somebody knows to make a public records request. And I think that what the correspondence is that a body receives is appropriate to have readily available for this 3 and 30-day period. I'm not sure which, where the 3 and where the 30 days comes in, but in some places those are separate files, in some cases they're combined. But as what the supervisors does, and they get a lot more correspondence, they don't include only what they have within the next 30 days and all these hypotheticals. They just simply put into their communications file everything that they get from the public that concerns board business or that the public clearly intends to address to a majority of the supervisors or the full board. And I think that pattern which the supervisors follow should be required here in the interest of openness and simplicity. Okay, thanks.
Thank you. Is there further public comment on new 67.24?
I think I'm looking at pages 68 and 69 of the package, 65 and 66 of the draft. I think there's things on these 2 pages that demonstrate the absolute need that somebody look at this and reconcile what these references are and make sure that they're not only correct, but that they're consistent. If you look at lines 10 and 11 on page 68, it talks about the California Public Records Act, and then it tells you about the Government Code section which embodies that law, or where the law is compiled. In line 12, it says under section 6724 of this article. Well, 6724 is the very section that you're dealing with. So what do they mean? Okay. On the next page, on line 6, they talk about the California Public Records Act, but this time, no reference to the Government Code section, its successor, or the etsec. And then if you go down another 5, they don't talk about the California Public Records Act anymore. Now they're talking about the Government Code section 6254, or its successor, subdivision A of what? The successor? So the whole point of this little discussion is there are instances throughout this document where it's just begging to have it straightened out with this kind of thing. And I see no reason, to be honest, why that couldn't be undertaken. Now that you know you're not going to try to get it on the ballot in November, have somebody go in, do it, and represent it to the task force, and then at least, you may not agree with everything, but at least you've got a document that somebody can look at and say, well, this was professionally done and put together, you know? And I really think that's important. And the other thing I want to mention is I am tired of seeing the word document instead of public records. I think that's a mistake. I think what you've got to emphasize is the word public and the word records throughout. Wherever you're talking about a public record, that's what you should talk about, and not about a document or something else. Thank you.
Hi, Kimo Crossman. You're taking public comment on 6724A only, is that right? Or all
No,
section?
the entire section.
Okay. Well then, let me say I concur with the previous speakers on their points. Additionally, my suggestion on 6724A is that all documents that are received by policy bodies should be posted online within 1 business day. And if you do that, then there's no reason to have a separate file, the 30 days, blah, blah, blah. Just post all the documents received online within 1 business day, and then you can take all this complicated stuff out. Don't have to worry about separate file. So that would be my recommendation on 67 on A. On section B, I'm very concerned about this provision here. It says, the identity and contact information of the sender of any letter or communication shall be presumed to be public information unless confidentiality is specifically requested by the sender or otherwise required by law. I'm concerned about people being able to request confidentiality when they're sending a communication to a public body. I really believe that the identity and contact information of someone who is trying to influence government should be disclosable. You already have to do that when it comes to campaign donations. If you look at the calendar provisions in Sunshine, it all requires the mayor and other department heads to document who they met with, even if it's at a private place, if it has to do with city business. So I would say that this provision here to let people to anonymously communicate with public officials or bodies is really, that's what it basically is allowing people to do. And I would advocate that in the case of whistleblowers, okay, that makes sense. No one's, make a provision for whistleblowers. But besides that, if someone wants to communicate about city business, then we, the public, should know who's communicating and what they're saying. So I think this allowing people to opt out with saying that the identity and contact information can be kept confidential if they write confidential at the top of it. Well, you know what's going to happen. Every lobbyist is going to write confidential at the top of every communication they write. So that just completely wipes out the idea of being able to see what these communications are. So I think this is really not a workable or good solution. It needs to be completely revamped. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Warfel, I believe you've already spoken, haven't you?
I've already spoken. I understood only A, which you were amending, was under discussion, and I certainly had a comment on B, similar to Mr. Crossman's, but very emphatic about it. So I wondered if, I didn't know you were taking for the whole section.
Well, we are.
May I?
Go ahead. Please be brief.
I'll be very brief. I think it's very simple to just let it be clear in whatever place you like that whatever anybody puts on a letter or other communication is a public record. I've seen that in other jurisdictions where they simply alert people, if you send us a communication, it's a public document. It's easy enough for a person, actually much easier than with campaign contributions, to either go anonymously by giving a false name or no name. A person can mail a letter, nobody knows where it came from or from whom, nobody knows the address. You can be as confidential or as anonymous as you like when you send something by, for example, letter and often by email. So this thing, I think, is a huge hole that has been added and absolutely should be completely gotten rid of. And if you want to say anything, it should say the opposite. Everything that's sent to a public entity is a public record, period. And a person can't opt to say, oh, by the way, I don't want this, that, or the other thing that I put in my letter made public.
Thank you. Further public comment on 67.24? Seeing none, public comment is closed. Task Force? Okay, first of all, on the page 68, line 6, where it says in a chronological order, the word A should be stricken. Second, on the
Mr. Chair, could you say that again, please?
page 68, packet page 68, line 6. The phrase in a chronological order, strike the word A. The chair suggested earlier that the word calendar be inserted twice on line 8 and line 9, where it says 30 days, make it 30 calendar days, without objection. Okay. Member Johnson.
Should the section on line 12 on page 65, should that be 67.25? Now,
I'm
with
sorry.
changes on page 65, line 12,
Line 12.
it says and not deemed disclosable under section 67.24. Should that now be 25?
Yes, I believe you're correct. Okay, thank you. Member Washburn?
On line 7, on page 65 of the document, it should read that rather than which. And I also, I'm interested in the change that Mr. Warfield suggested about not limiting this public review file to letters and memoranda and other communications that the clerk has distributed, but rather have it be inclusive. I think, and then Mr. Crossman suggested having it online, but I think that's could be online in addition to having the physical copies for people who don't have access. I don't have the wording right now, but I'm interested in those two additions or changes.
I'm sorry. Okay, so you're suggesting adding.
This public review file should, I think we should strike, or we should, a copy of any letter, memorandum, or other communication that the clerk has received, including, include everything. I don't know about bills and stuff like that, operational stuff, but any public record, rather than limiting it to information that the clerk has distributed to or received from a quorum of the policy body. Because there are other records that are public records that would not necessarily be distributed to the policy body.
Okay.
So perhaps just striking that and striking a copy of any letter, memorandum, or other communication that the clerk has received during the previous 30 calendar days, irrespective of subject matter, origin, or recipient. And I continued.
So you're proposing striking that whole section? Starting with, I'm sorry, you're...
Okay, that the clerk...
I'm sorry, I'm not keeping up, and that's my fault, so
Okay.
bear with me.
All right, so beginning on line 7,
Okay.
okay, or any or other communication that the clerk has received. So we would strike has distributed to or received from a quorum of the policy body. It's just would simply read that the clerk has received within the previous 30 calendar days, irrespective of subject matter, origin, or recipient, except commercial solicitations, periodical, that sort of thing. Junk mail, sort of. Because all of these other things would be are public records. It's not simply items that are being calendared.
So you're proposing striking out, striking
Striking out everything from distributed to or received from a quorum of the policy body concerning a matter calendared by the body within the previous 30 calendar days or likely to be. So it will simply read, or other communication the clerk has received within the previous 30 days, irrespective of subject matter, origin, or recipient, except junk mail.
Okay. Member Knebber?
Member Wolf has actually done that on the screen so we can look at it.
Will be in this gold color. It won't let me change the color, so. It won't let me change the color, so it's in gold.
Member Johnson?
And why are you striking distributed to?
Because that limits, it shrinks the number of public records that would be in this review file. It would be just a subset of the public records. Whereas there are certainly things that the clerk receives that are not distributed to the board, the policy body. And those things should be in the public review file because they are public records. That's it's like the current records. Yeah. Sort of a rolling file. But we also want to make which that because it's a restrictive clause.
You're going to have to give me a lesson on that.
Oh, sure, I'll do that.
Okay, so if I have it correct, it now reads, the clerk of the Board of Supervisors and the clerk of each policy body shall maintain a file accessible to any person during normal office hours at the office of the policy body or at a place nearby, clearly designated to the public, containing in chronological order a copy of any letter, memorandum, or other communication that the clerk has received within the previous 30 calendar days or is likely to be calendared.
No, not that part.
Not that, just that is received within the next 30, within the previous 30 calendar days, period?
Well,
Is that correct?
no, I guess we do want to keep to be calendared, yeah.
Or is likely, there should be is.
Well, it has to be everything received in the previous 30 days, except
Right.
junk mail. But then I guess any items that are going to possibly be calendared, they should be in that file too.
Okay, so or is likely to be calendared within the next 30 calendar days, irrespective of subject matter, origin, or recipient, except commercial solicitations, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So really what we're doing is striking from a quorum of the policy body concerning a member calendared by that body. That's what we're doing. We're striking that particular phrase from the section. Okay. Mr. Rustum, are you up with us?
Yes, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Further further discussion. Member Washburn.
Well, the other part was what Mr. Crossman suggested. Well, not exactly, because I heard him saying that all this, rather than have this physical file available, that it should be online. I think it should be online in addition to having the physical file. So I don't know if this would be a new letter or whether we want to have it in A. A really speaks to what ought to be there.
Does it maintain a file both physically and online?
Oh, okay. Just add that simple phrase. Yeah. Maintain a file accessible to any
Please.
person during normal, as well as.
Mr. Chair, just the line number, please.
Member Wolf.
Or
Line 4?
maintain a file, and you can qualify file to do what you want it to do. She wants a file to be online as well as in hard copy, so you could put it right there.
I think it almost needs a new sentence. Because this physical file has to be accessible, physically accessible and available at all times when the office is open. A new sentence, yeah. Yeah, it could be at the end of A, we could add a sentence saying, this public review file shall also be available online. Yeah, it's pretty straightforward.
Okay.
Mr. Chair?
Member Wolf.
I'm just wondering if in our definitions, we should also add the word online. Just as a sidebar. We don't have to do it right this moment.
Okay. We can. So we can revisit 67.19. We can add in 67.19, we can add a subsection D, online shall mean, and we can have suggestions for that at the next time we discuss the package. Okay. Member Washburn proposes adding at the end of section 67.24A, this public review file shall also be available online. Without objection? Okay. Does anyone wish to make any changes, further changes to 67.24B per the suggestions of Mr. Crossman and I believe Mr. Warfield? I personally, while I understand their point, there is also a question of a First Amendment right here to communicate with, particularly with a policy body, and have your anonymity respected if you desire. It's a thorny question because obviously, as Mr. Crossman pointed out, it could open the door to backroom communications by anonymous communications by lobbyists, and that's something we certainly don't want. Member Goldman.
We had a case one time that we tried where the person was completely
microphone,
anonymous.
Is your microphone on? Yeah.
We had a case where we tried a case where it was completely anonymous and the person appeared by phone, as you'll recall. We have somebody in the audience right now who is anonymous tenants. I think if someone wishes to remain anonymous, they should be able to remain anonymous.
Okay. Excuse me? Okay. There have been some revisions here. Without objection, we will accept these revisions and move forward. Okay, we've had a request for, before we move on to section 67.25, we will have a 10-minute recess. We're back in session. Before we continue our discussions, just want to give a note of thanks to Member Wolf, who brought his computer for use in connection with the projector, so we can have on screen for the benefit of the public, particularly the changes as we're going through them. And also thanks to Kimo Crossman for agreeing to help keep up as we go through this. So thanks, a big thanks to both of you. We are now with new section 67.25, public information that must be disclosed. There are this is a rather long one, so what I would suggest is taking them by subsection, by letter subsection, starting with section A. There are a number of revisions that have been suggested here. Is there any, in section A, is there any further revision that the task force would like to see made? Okay. Is there any public comment on what is proposed for new section 67.25? A.
Yes, Peter Warfield, Library Users Association. I think, if I understand correctly, the portion crossed out under A1 is good. It simplifies the thing and takes out some tortured wording. And I can also tell you from experience, which few, if any of you may remember, that the recommendation of the author has been used as one of the hooks to invalidate the whole thing. So I can tell you that I requested a document and essentially at the time was told, we're not giving you a single word because the whole thing is a recommendation of the author and is therefore exempt under this portion. I'm not sure, so I'm glad that the difficult wording that opens the door to non-disclosure seems to have been taken out. I don't think I understand what is intended or meant or desired under the new wording. This section is not intended to alter or extend the requirements under any document retention policy adopted by a policy body or department. I don't really understand why that's there or what that is supposed to be clarifying or adding or explaining. With respect to item 2, there seems to be a whole bunch that's been crossed out, and I'm not clear whether this is, well, it says it's been moved. So maybe somebody can just say whether it's been moved someplace else, and that's the only other change that's occurred here, is the location.
Bless you.
Thank you.
And I guess we're going on quite a number of pages here if we're talking about the entire, section A has 1, 2. Oh, and then it goes to B, okay. So if footnote 21 is correct and it's just been moved, then I don't have much to say about that. But I do think that the new portion is not clear to me as to what's intended or why it's in there or what it is helping anybody to understand. And I am glad for the portion that's been cut out. As I said, thank you.
Thank you. Further public comment on 6725A.
Well, actually, I I want to address the 4 lines that precede subsection A. Notwithstanding the legal discretion to withhold certain information under the Public Records Act, the following policies and so forth. I don't know what legal discretion is. I think what they're talking about is notwithstanding any exemptions otherwise available that could be used to withhold certain public information or public records under the CPRA. Whose legal discretion are we talking about? I think the point is that the CPRA provides a number of exemptions to disclosure, and I think there may even be 1 or 2 prohibitions, meaning you can't disclose it even if you want to. So I think it has to be clarified exactly whether it's those exemptions that we're talking about. And again, I would emphasize the use of the words public records, public information, and so forth, instead of documents and information. And the other suggestion I have, which I think would solve a lot of repetitive stuff in here, would be to simply define the California Public Records Act right at the beginning, and those sections of the government code and any successor provisions there too. And that way you avoid this repetition and references to the California Public Records Act. That would clear up about maybe 100 words throughout the document. Other than that, I suppose A is probably suitable with those word changes. Thank you.
Thank you. Further public comment on 6725A?
Hi, Kimo Craftsman. I concur with the other 2 speakers. I also wanted to say that in particular, line 16 and 17, this is that new provision that's been added. It says, this section is not intended to alter or extend the requirements under any document retention policy adopted by a policy body or department. I don't think this is in the right place. This section here is about disclosing information that happens to be in, currently in the department. You put in a request, if they have the record, they got to give it in whatever format it's in. This new section, this new little line here too, is about preserving draft documents and versioning and all that. This isn't the right place for that. This is all about what records have to be disclosed. If there's a draft document that happens to be in existence when you put in a public records request, they have to give it to you. So this whole thing about document retention and all that, that's not the right place. I'm not even sure it's even relevant. I'm not sure why it's added in the first place, and because I don't remember there being disputes about it. And I mean, there's certainly disputes about departments destroying records, but this isn't really addressing that either. So I would, I can't recall who added this or why it was added, and I don't think, so I'm suggesting that you strike lines 16 and 17, because it's about preserving draft documents that would otherwise not be retained under a retention policy, but this is about disclosing draft documents. That's what the section is. If the draft document's sitting in the office when you ask for it, they got to give it to you. Thanks.
Thank you. Further public comment on 67.25A?
I wanted to comment on line 9, the enhanced rights. I don't understand what that means. Enhanced, I mean, it could be interpreted any way anybody wants to interpret it. How do you enhance rights?
Further public comment? Seeing none, public comment is closed.
Mr. Chair?
Task Force Member Wolf.
My concern about the addition in A with regards to this section is not intended to alter and so on. It just seems like and I'm wondering, does every policy body have a different retention policy, or is there a uniform retention policy that we are describing in the ordinance? Because here it says alter or extend the requirements under any document retention policy adopted by a policy body or department. We've run into this problem before as to, well, this department has this retention policy, this department has this retention policy.
And some have none.
Some have none, and some erase everything, you know. So how, I just think that this makes it a little more unwieldy. And then dealing with things on a case-by-case basis, it's like, well, we have an official policy. Well, who gives the authority for creating a policy? Can departments have their own internal policy? I'm just going on here, but I think there needs to be a little more in this ordinance. We need to be defining what that is, and I believe there are other sections that discuss the actual limitations or what the actual retention policies shall be. And I'm not recalling what they are right this moment or where they are. And so, sans that, I'm wondering, to save time, whether we might hold this one over for further research, unless somebody has some idea.
Okay, I have something of my own, but Member Washburn, you wanted to comment?
There's a section, and it seems to have lost its number, but on page 50 of the document, 53 of the packet, there's records and correspondence shall be maintained and shall survive tenure and transition of officials. Oh, I guess this is 6731. The number isn't lined up quite right.
6731?
6731, right.
So that's later in the document.
Right, it's later, right.
Okay. So, okay, so that would take things out of sequence. If your definition is for record retention comes later, but you're now giving certain provisions prior, the course of the law is serial, so whatever comes before, you know, so I think we get the idea here. I think it needs to be kind of reworked somehow.
Member Knebber?
Although we've done that in other spots where we mention policies and then went on later to expand and define those policies. I don't think in and of itself it's a problem. I don't think in and of itself it's a problem, because we do that in other sections where we mention that, you know, this is what's just the section we talked about before, referenced section after it, 6724, 6725. So if it's clear, I'm not saying it is, but if it's clear, I don't think it's a problem that it goes into depth later on, if you understand my meaning.
I think also I think that footnote was inserted by a former member, Craven Green, and I think the intent here is to make sure that document retention policies conform to the ordinance and are consistent with state case law. That's my reading of particularly of the footnote. But we may want to revisit that.
Yeah, my concern is without a reference to case law, that we can read what the rationale is, where the opinion of that case law is. It makes it a little, I'm not quite sure where we're going with it.
Okay, well, I think I still have the notes that Member Craven Green submitted several months ago, and I'll go back and look at those and see if I can gain some clarification from it. And if anyone else wants to do that, certainly you're welcome and encouraged to do so. Member Johnson?
What case law are you referring? The state has no defined retention policy, so I'm wondering what case law you're referring to.
Well, in the
It's like the
footnote-
IRS, you don't have to.
In
they
the footnote, it
suggest-
says Public Records Act case law, and there probably are some. I don't have anything specific right at the top of my head. I do have one suggestion per the section preamble before we come to A, and the comment from Mr. Grossman. I do have some suggested revised language here, which would be notwithstanding information disclosure, even though I can't pronounce this, notwithstanding information disclosure exemptions otherwise available under the California Public Records Act, comma, the following policies, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Member Washburn?
Could you repeat that, please?
Yes. Cross out the legal discretion to withhold certain information, and instead have it read, notwithstanding information disclosure exemptions otherwise available. Member Washburn?
That's better than what's here, I think, but this section deals with information that must be disclosed, so I don't think we need to mention that there are exemptions in this section exactly. We're enumerating the things that must be disclosed. So I think it would simplify matters a lot if we didn't have these asides, that one in particular. I would just strike that whole first clause and begin the following policy shall govern specific types of documents or specific types of public records, because Mr. Grossman makes a point about that. And enhanced rights, I was listening to the anonymous tenant's suggestion that, or wondering why we're talking about enhanced rights. I mean, rights are rights. I'm just trying to acknowledge what's been said and have us think about it. And I also think in A, this section is not intended to alter. That's another aside that I don't think is, needed here. We deal with retention policies later on, and of course there are retention policies, but what we're saying here is we're just enumerating. These things must be disclosed. And you can make all kinds of asides, but I would suggest we not. I think we should keep this straightforward and clean.
Member Goldman?
I move that we strike the preamble and line 16 and 17.
Okay. Is there a second? Motion dies for lack of a second.
Wait,
17 is already
Excuse me.
stricken.
Member Knebber?
I actually like the preamble if it is clear. I have no problem with it as it's been changed on here. I do think we need to strike 16 and 17, but I do think that a note saying that it referencing that there are legal reasons to disclose under the Public Records Act is appropriate there. and saying, I think the way that's worded is very straightforward, notwithstanding those legal precedents or those legal incidences, these are what are disclosable. I have no problem with that.
Member Washburn.
So you're saying we're not going to reference material that might be exempt. We're going to reference disclosable items in the California Public Records Act.
No. What I'm saying is, what the preamble is saying is that it's acknowledging that there are things in the California Public Records Act that are not disclosable, that are exempt from disclosure. It's highlighting that and saying that, notwithstanding that fact, these are the things, when you go on into under draft and memoranda, all that stuff, these are the things that are required for disclosure, that are required to be disclosed.
Okay, Member Knebber, just a quick question. Are you proposing that the language in the preamble be kept as was originally presented, or?
No, not as written out. Notwithstanding information, as the chair suggested, notwithstanding information, disclosure, exemptions, et cetera,
Thank you.
et cetera.
Member Johnson?
I agree, and I think rather than just, I agree with what was just said. I think rather than just eliminating 16 and 17, I think if you take those asides out, you're not crafting language that provides adequate warning that they may not be able to get it in some way. So I think that, I'm not sure that that's the right language to put that second part in, but there are two ways where you might be surprised that you can't get this information, or that there may be an argument about it. One is that there are certain exemptions under the CPRA, and the other one would be that there may be a retention policy that a certain draft you want has been destroyed, and that you may not agree with that retention policy, but it may exist. So if you don't put the asides in there, someone's going to request it and may not be familiar with that.
Well,
Member Washburn? And then Member Knebber.
Well, I understand what you're saying. I think, though, that this document is not just for the public, it's also for city employees. And I was thinking about what are some overarching principles, what are our goals here? And I think one of them ought to be that we need to change the culture of our city government. And I think to do that, you've got to be very deliberate. And so for this section, I would prefer it be really straightforward. I mean, there are going to be exemptions. They're addressed in another part of the document, and there are retention policies. So I feel that having this be a careful enumeration of what must be disclosed is the way to go.
Member Knebber.
And I agree. I think that we are a little bit talking past each other. I definitely don't think that we need to have lines 16 and 17, because one of the things we're doing is try to set a rational retention policy. I mean, we've had things come up against us. I don't think putting that in there and saying that we need to have, but if they have a different retention policy, it's okay. I think that we're trying to set an example there. But I do think that the California Public Records Act has things in there that say these are not disclosable. So I don't think that is giving them out. I mean, it's just acknowledging that these are, it's not saying what they are. It's not saying you can go to this and whatever. It's saying that if they come up with that and are able to prove that, then I'm sorry, but that's not disclosable. It's not a policy. It's written into the CPA.
Well, I think that we have already established that the CPRA and the Brown Act they establish minimums for sunshine, and that cities and counties do have the right to have information requirements that go beyond what's required in the CPRA. I personally liked the mention here of the CPRA because it tells people in city government, yeah, we know what the CPRA exempts, and we're saying not for San Francisco. So I would prefer to leave it in there. Regarding lines 16 and 17, if we are going to vote on that, I would like to do it separately, not in the same motion with the preamble question. And again, before we act on lines 16 and 17, I would say that it's a good idea to go back over the notes that Member Craven Green put together on that, because I think it will clarify the issue. I think since we're no longer under the deadline to try to get this on this November's ballot, we have a little bit of time on that. That's my own personal preference.
I would agree with you. I think that since we're not pressed, 16 and 17 was put in there recently. I think we should look over what it is, but I definitely think that we should go forward with the preamble as amended by the chair.
Okay. Further discussion. Okay. So I think, and again, we have agreed to revisit 67.25A at our next meeting. Now, before we go any further, some people have suggested that the hour is getting kind of late. So, do we want to continue? Do we want to call it a night, or do we want to move further? What's the consensus here? Do we want to go through maybe tackle B?
Yeah, we can do B.
All right. That's all right. Is there? Let's see. Look at my own notes here. No, I have no changes of my own that I would propose in B. Is there anybody else who has any, beyond the changes already proposed, in here, are there any additional revisions that would be desirable? Member Knebber?
Are we not going to, you want to pass on doing the preamble until later also, just because you want to look over that before?
We might as well. I'll just leave them both to next meeting. Member Johnson?
There's some confusing language on line 15. It says advice on compliance with analysis of. Should there be and or an or?
I think it would be an or.
Advice on compliance with, analysis of, or. I think there should be, the word or should be inserted before an.
Yeah. Yes.
So it should say advice on compliance with, comma, analysis of, or an opinion.
No. There should be a comma after liability. So it should read advice on compliance with, analysis of, an opinion concerning, comma, concerning liability, comma, or duties under.
Okay.
Or any communication otherwise concerning California Public Records Act.
Well, then it's clear as is. There's no comma after liability, no.
An opinion concerning liability or duties under, or any communication otherwise. Okay, yeah, you're right.
Yeah, okay, so that stays as is. Anything else? All right, is there any public comment on 67.25B? B for boy.
Hi, Kim Crossman.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Please proceed.
Okay. Kim Crossman. Couple items. First of all, wanted to mention that as the editing goes on here on the computer, the line numbers here will change. They won't match with what you're seeing in the printed version. Just to call that out. So when I was checking 16 and 17, it was different on my screen. So don't be confused by that. This is an issue that's been hotly debated, section, it's line 15, the advice on compliance of, this is an extraordinary provision that was written in Prop G. Basically, it says any communication with the city attorney's office or about Public Records Act or Brown Act or PRA or ethics is disclosable. And it seems pretty obvious. It says any communication. But this, the city attorney has decided to completely interpret this in a way that's not represented in the language here in any way. They have decided that it means it doesn't include their work product communications. Now, that typically might be, you could see that might be the case because it would be extraordinary to disclose the work product communications. But you see up above, there's other provisions for disclosing other legal communications at times. We know 6721I, which talks about the responsibilities of the city attorney, that all those communications have to be, regarding Public Records Acts, have to be disclosed. So there's already, it's been clear precedent in the ordinance that the idea is to disclose every communication. What we've seen is the city attorney makes broad claims of work product on documents and doesn't disclose it in any fashion at all. Now, there was one case before you that was decided incorrectly when Ms. Craven said, well, they meant, this was, the legislative history said that work product would be excluded here. Well, that's just inaccurate because there was no legislative history to this ordinance. It was written by two lawyers and just put on the ballot. There was never legislative discussion. So the big issue here is that we need to call it out very clearly because it keeps getting fought over, and say that under lines 15, 16, 17 that includes work product if it's related to these matters. I can't tell you how many times the city attorney has used work product as a way to get out of disclosing what they're doing when it's clear, when it says any communication, it means any communication. Thank you.
Thank you. Further public comment on 6725B?
Peter Warfield again. Did we have comment on the previous measure, including the discussion about 6725 preamble?
Yes, we did.
Okay. First of all, I'd like to second and echo what Mr. Crossman said. And I think sometimes the simplest language can be the clearest. Language such as, these are things that are subject to disclosure. Language such as anything to do with. Matters having to do with, and then list basically the sunshine laws. And I think anything to do with or any documents related to would be avoiding the ability of folks to sort of pick with seafood forks, little tiny forks, into the crevices of the law and say, well, this particular thing over here doesn't really apply over here, and so we are, we are exempt, or we can do what we like. Any communication? Okay. The other thing I want to say is that a member of the public previously made a comment that I think is relevant here as well as elsewhere. And that is, if it's hard to understand, it's not well written, particularly if it is this section of the law, meaning Section 67. There are many laws on the books and many measures that need to be followed. Many of them are for particular departments or individuals or for lawyers. But I think Section 67 is particularly one that the public is using all the time and is routinely needing to use, if you like, which is to say, needs to read as well as understand. And so I think Section 67 overall, this section as well as other sections of 67, but the whole thing needs to be carefully worked on so that ordinary folks of, if you like, average intelligence and education can have a chance at understanding in clear language what this ordinance says, what this Sunshine Ordinance says. And I think wherever there is confusion, certainly if you guys are confused or we in the public are confused, it's a strong signal that maybe it needs to be recast so that it's much easier to understand, so that people who are trying to get information and may not be lawyers or experts and don't want to be and shouldn't have to be, they should be able to understand what this means in plain English for their circumstance or some other circumstance that perhaps they're helping somebody with. So I think that wherever there is some confusion or unclarity about what we're talking about and how it's supposed to work, I think part of a very useful and valuable job for you is to make it really clear what exactly is the law and what is intended, what is required, so that everybody can understand it as clearly as possible. Thanks.
Thank you. Further public comment, please.
From a drafting point of view, in line 9 on page 70 of the package, notwithstanding any exemptions otherwise provided by law. Well, I think you've already said it in the first 4 lines of this section, 6725, so I would simply take that out. I would also take out under this ordinance because they're subject to disclosure, period. In line, the discussion about the commas and ors, I'll skip for now, but in line 17, there's a reference to any San Francisco governmental ethics code. Well, there's only one ethics code, as I understand it, so it's either the San Francisco Ethics Code, or it would be more generic, any governmental ethics code. I also want to point out section on page 108 of the package, section 6738C. Much of that is, in a way, duplicating this triple I in parens. And at some point, somebody's going to have to decide, I think, which of the two is where it belongs and how broad it should be written. The work product issue is one that's very, unfortunately, Mr. Threed is not here because he and I joust about that, as I have with Mr. Zarefsky and others in the city attorney's office. There are 2 kinds of work product. I think I mentioned this. There's a real work product, and then there's conditional work product. So it's never clear which one the department or the agency or even the city attorney is going to rely on. And I think that has to be parsed out somewhere, and I have suggested language. I think it's probably in this section that I'd like to suggest at some point. Thank you.
Thank you. Further public comment?
Mr. Chair,
Member Wolf.
just a typo that needs to be added. In 6725A, there's an addition in the first line. This is no preliminary or draft document and no inter or intra-agency memoranda. There should be a hyphen after inter.
Correct.
Did you catch that, Kimo?
And there should be a space after that hyphen to separate it from the word or. Member Washburn.
First of all, I like the suggestion to remove the first clause in 1.
Okay.
And
Pardon me, did I close public comment yet?
Yeah.
Okay.
I like the idea of deleting that first clause and having 1 simply read the following are public records subject to disclosure, and then delete under this ordinance. And then I think that here is where we need to clearly deal with the work product issue, and I think this needs careful consideration. We need to be very careful with our wordsmithing on this one. I agree with Mr. Warfield that plain English is always best. If you can't explain something in plain English, you likely don't understand it. But also, lawyers don't speak plain English, and we've got to deal with the work product thing. And we have to, here's our chance to really, I'm sorry about my cell phone. We have to really deal with it, and we should carefully consider what Mr. Grossman has offered.
Time out. Time in. Okay, do we have any suggestions on wording or where it should go, or should we put that off, continue this till our next meeting and just kind of give ourselves some time to, as Monsieur Poirot would say, put the little gray cells to work?
Yeah.
Okay, so we will continue 67.25A and B. Do we wish to move further on into C, or is this a good time to adjourn?
As I told the chair earlier, I'm ready.
I'm sorry?
As I told the chair earlier, I would like to leave
Okay,
earlier than later today because of the dates.
We have at least one request to kind of wrap things up. Is that Member Washburn?
I'd like to suggest we wrap it up, too.
Okay. One brief announcement. I may be late getting to our next regular meeting, which is on June 22nd. The reason is I have been called to jury duty that week, so it's possible that I will be arriving late here. And we don't have a vice chair yet, so if I am not here when the meeting starts, then you can, on the spot, elect a vice chair to govern the proceedings until I get here.
If you tell them on the task force, they won't want you on a jury.
I'm sorry?
If you tell them you're on the task force, they won't want you on a jury. You'll be
I'll
here.
keep that in mind. Okay. Move to adjourn. Is there a second?
Second.
We are adjourned. And again, thanks everybody for your attendance and for all the work you put into this.